Entering their first bye week of the 2024 season, the Michigan State Spartans hold a 3-3 overall record and a 1-2 record in Big Ten conference play. And since we are 6 games through Michigan State's season, we have 6 games left to complete the 12-game regular season. I want to discuss this team and talk about where I think this team is heading, what direction they are facing in the short term and in the long term, discuss the remaining schedule, and also this roster and coaching staff. I think that the coaching staff is doing the best job that it can, and at the same time I can say that I have questions about Aiden Childs and if he's the future for the program. And the trenches are clearly battered, and that affects the short-term gains that this team can make in 2024. And Charles Brantley is playing out of his mind, but the secondary is still not good. And Nick Marsh and these young receivers are great at times, but they have an inconsistent quarterback, and they are young. I expected Michigan State to be 4-2 entering the bye week, so 3-3 isn't that far off. And I also expected them to have, from a preseason standpoint, a 1-2 record in Big Ten Conference play, beating Maryland, which they did, even though I sadly didn't predict that to happen the week of the game, and also losing to Ohio State and losing to Oregon, which I predicted that they would. So here we are. And before I want to get into everything, I think it's appropriate to look at the Oregon game. I wanted to do an Oregon versus Michigan State reaction and analysis. I just didn't have the time due to some things that happened, but we can do a little bit of that here before moving forward and giving some opinions of mine, some strong opinions that I think are backed by evidence about this team. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I know that many of you probably watch this channel and think that you're subscribed, but I suspect that some of you are not. So please make sure to subscribe before we resume this, and also like the video, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts on Michigan State's football season, 6 games in, down in the comment section below. Share this video around to other Michigan State Spartan fans, as the more fans from especially Big Ten schools that we have, the better, because we pride ourselves on being the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. Speaking of the Big Ten, we have 18 conversational threads in our Discord server, each one dedicated to all of the 18. That doesn't sound right, but each one is dedicated to one of the 18 Big Ten teams. That's a better way to phrase it. So there is a Michigan State thread in the Discord server where you are encouraged to constantly express your thoughts about the Spartan football team. The link to the Discord server is in the description, down below in the pinned comment as well. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, check out the Patreon page or merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, watching the video all the way through, and joining the Discord server, all of those things are free. They only take as much time as this video, or if you don't have the time and just want to do the 6 things, that doesn't take much time at all, even less. And it helps out the channel and also helps you out. Go green, go white. I'm a Michigan fan, by the way, and I very much admire Michigan State, and I want them to be good, because from my standpoint, as a Michigan fan, just kind of privately, when my rivals are good, when they are operating at a high level of success, it's much more entertaining when Michigan beats them. But it's also entertaining product in general, and I root for Ohio State and Michigan State to be successful. That might come across as weird, but I'm a weird person, and I enjoy it. I do not view that as a negative thing at all. What I can say for a fact is weird, and not in a positive way, is Aiden Childs' performance. And this is where I want to start talking about Oregon for a few minutes before diving in on some other things. Against Oregon, Michigan State, I think, had one of their worst performances of the season. Maybe Oregon is just that good. Maybe they're the best team in the Big Ten. After all, Oregon, and I could tell this on Friday night when watching the game live, they played Michigan State and beat them in a much more physical way than Ohio State did. Ohio State beat Michigan State purely with finesse. There was little to no obvious physical advantage that Ohio State displayed against Michigan State in the trenches. Through the air, absolutely, with Jeremiah Smith dominating the DBs, and same with Emeka Egbuka and also G. Scott. But Michigan State's secondary is suspect as it is. That's not really all that special. Oregon, however, barely used any finesse. They just ground Michigan State into the dirt. They took the Spartans, put them in their mouth, chewed them like a pack of gum for an hour, or a few hours rather, and spit them out of their mouth. That's what Oregon did. Now, what Ohio State did against Iowa, I think totally, confirms to me that they're a physical team and also can be a team that beats you with finesse. That Ohio State is just that good, that they can do a little bit of everything. But Oregon football totally imposed their will on Michigan State. They had 2 turnovers, 2 interceptions in the red zone. But outside of that, they won every other battle. 477 total yards to Michigan State's 250, 25 first downs to Michigan State's 16, a 2-minute advantage in TOP. And that was really only overcome by the Spartans in literally the final 7 minutes, where they put together a 6-minute, 12-second drive that finished out with a Jonathan Kim field goal against Oregon backups, and with Michigan State backups, by the way. Circling back to my comment about Aiden Giles and how his play is weird. It is so up and down and so inconsistent that I don't even know what to call it. So I'm just going to side with bad. He is not playing well whatsoever. Against Oregon, 10 of 17 for 154 yards, 9.1 yards per pass attempt. Some of that indeed was in garbage time. At other moments, he just completed long throws. And at other times, he didn't complete the football at all. He had one fumble, and it was a critical fumble. It was in the end zone. Remember that first drive where Michigan State is just kind of scampering away from Oregon's defense? They're finding unsustainable ways to convert third down and to extend their initial drive to try and gain some momentum against Oregon. Well, Oregon holds them to a 4th down, and then Aiden Giles nearly overthrows his receiver, who catches it. I believe it was Nick Marsh or Monterey Foster Jr. who caught that. And Michigan State is down in Oregon territory, I believe inside the 5. And then Aiden Giles takes the ball next play, runs it into the end zone. Oh, wait. He fumbled it, and he fumbled it into the end zone. He is very loose with the football. He is very careless, and the next minute looks like he's too careful and too anxious. Right now he has a 58.3 QBR, which is 65th nationally. For comparison, Alex Orji's QBR, at least before the Washington game where he got benched, was also in the 50s. So Aiden Giles is not doing much for Michigan State. In fact, I would argue, a part of me, that he's arguably holding Michigan State back from achieving bigger and better things. The problem is he's Michigan State's best quarterback, or at least the quarterback with the higher upside. So Michigan State is more limited at quarterback than I thought they were entering the regular season. And I don't know if they'll start Tommy Schuster. I don't think they would. But Giles doesn't look all that confident right now, and that's something that I'm going to dive into a little bit deeper in the next few minutes of this video. But overall against Oregon, Michigan State couldn't run the ball. 30 carries, 59 yards, 1 touchdown by K'Ron Lynch-Adams, and that was in the 4th quarter. K'Ron Lynch-Adams barely played in this game until the 4th quarter. Michigan State, more accurately, if you were to take out garbage time, really averaged like 1 yard per carry, if less than that. Aiden Giles got sacked 5 times. You look at Oregon, they had 6 TFLs, 3 passes defended. They ran, Oregon did, for 213 yards, 5.8 yards per carry, 2 rushing touchdowns. Jordan James had a long rush of 41. And outside of those 2 interceptions, and especially early in the game, at one point Dylan Gabriel was like 1 of 5 for a pick. Gabriel finished the day 20 of 32 for 257 yards, 8 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions with a 79.8 QBR. Giles, meanwhile, had a 48.3 QBR on the day. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly because it was a game where I thought Michigan State would be somewhat competitive. I thought that Michigan State in that game would not just show that they have upside and that they can be a good team when they put things together. I think that I believed also that the matchup between Oregon and Michigan State would show how much better Ohio State was than Oregon. And it didn't, but then I kind of got that feeling, and we'll see if it's correct this Saturday, out of Ohio State pounding Iowa despite shooting itself in the foot for basically the entire first half outside of their initial touchdown drive. Speaking of Ohio State, and also of Oregon, who match up this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I want that video to get 10,000 views, so if you haven't already, please watch that video via the link in the pinned comment. But also speaking of these two teams, they're Michigan State's toughest opponents by a mile. I thought that Michigan was going to be on Oregon and Ohio State's level in the preseason. I was straight up mistaken. They're not. Iowa, for example, is a better team than Michigan, I do believe. Indiana is. Illinois is. Rutgers, I would say, is. One problem for MSU is that they play all of those teams that I just mentioned for the rest of the season, many of whom, most notably Illinois and Indiana, are much better than I predicted from a preseason angle. Looks like I was a year too late on Illinois. I thought they'd be very good in 25 and better this year compared to last year, but man, it looks like they're going to be potentially a great team in 25 because much of their roster still has a year or more of eligibility, and since they are Illinois, none of their players will have the branding to help their draft stock, so I imagine many of them will return, but they're good this year. At least for Michigan State, Ohio State and Oregon are out of the way, because I didn't think that Michigan State had a shot to beat those two teams in the preseason. Again, even with Michigan, I thought the Wolverines would be on the same level as those two in the preseason. It's a rivalry game between Michigan State and Michigan. And it's also a trap game for Michigan because they play Oregon after they play Michigan State. So I never thought that game, it was necessarily impossible. It was very unlikely. Now Michigan State has a sizable chance against the Wolverines. As for Ohio State and Oregon, though, big losses for MSU. They got defeated by Oregon 31-10 and by Ohio State 38-7 on their own home field. Those right now are two top three teams. They are easily top 10 in power ratings. Ohio State, I think, is the best team in the country. If not, they're certainly number 2, maybe number 3 at the worst. After that tough stretch, where road game against Boston College, painful loss, and then blowout losses occurred by Ohio State, or incurred by Ohio State and Oregon, there's room for taking a breath and resetting things and assessing where the season is at and what Michigan State can do from here. After this bye week, they play Iowa Saturday, October 19th in another night game, 7:30 p.m. on NBC and Peacock, just like the Ohio State game. They play on the road at Michigan in a time that is to be determined, Saturday, October 26th. They host Indiana Saturday, November 2nd. They get another bye. Then they play at Illinois Saturday, November 16th. Play Purdue at home Friday, November 22nd, 8 p.m. on Fox. And Purdue's pretty bad. They may fire their head coach by then. So I think that's kind of a free win for Michigan State unless they show up and completely crap their pants. And then they host Rutgers to close out the regular season Saturday, November 30th. Tell me in the comments below if you think Michigan State is going bowling with that remaining schedule. Because I will tell you, I'm a little bit doubtful. I don't think that Iowa is going to be a pushover. With Aiden Childs and how inconsistent and also turnover prone he's been, Iowa's defense, mainly because of their secondary, has taken steps back compared to last year, with one exception. They're way better at forcing turnovers than they were last year. They're forcing, I think, about 1.5 turnovers per game this season, which is double what they forced last year, where they didn't even force a turnover per game overall, not just interceptions, but turnovers flat per game. And they were playing with a easy Big Ten West schedule. Easy, like a complete, actual cupcake schedule. And I think that won't be an easy game for Michigan State. I think that Iowa's defense will probably eat MSU's offense alive, especially the rushing offense, given all the injuries that are piling up, and also the passing offense, given Child's proclivity to turn it over. And Iowa has a similar caliber of rushing offense to Ohio State. I think a big part of the reason why Ohio State was so easily able to shut down Iowa's rushing attack is because they stacked the box basically every play. And also, I think Ohio State's a little bit better in running the ball than Iowa is. But I think Iowa's still going to be strong in the trenches. They're going to run it. And McNamara has shown an ability sometimes to be a good field general, and he has better receivers than he did last year. As for Indiana and Illinois and Purdue, Rutgers, and even Michigan, they're more than a game away on Michigan State's schedule, so I won't go into heavy detail as I will with the Iowa game. I think the Iowa game is pretty important because it's coming off of a bye. Iowa plays most teams close, so there is a chance for an upset, and it would be pretty big for Michigan State if they earned it. I'm leaning toward no there. Against Michigan, that's pretty close to a coin flip, but Michigan right now still has the better defense, even with how bad Martindale has been as a coach. At least they have more talent on that side of the ball, and their rushing attack is going to be pretty good, and it's on the road. So that, I think, is a game that could easily be a loss. Indiana is an efficiency monster, and Michigan State has not been effective whatsoever, so I'd lean toward an L there as well. Similar with Illinois, and it's on the road, and Illinois also has a bye week, the same week before that Michigan State has a bye week. Purdue at home, I'd think an automatic W, and Rutgers at home is another game where I would lean toward an L. I see 4-8, 5-7. I think the Boston College win was necessary for Michigan State to reach a bowl game in hindsight. And I think Boston College is as bad, if not worse, or is as good, if not worse, than 5 of those 6 remaining teams on MSU's schedule. They're certainly, in my mind, worse than Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. Certainly worse than those 3 teams. But their toughest opponents in Oregon and Ohio State are out of the way. So Michigan State should be more competitive. Should. Unless their team spirit is broken and the injuries in the trenches continue to pile up. Michigan State has 2 offensive guards out, which, when you look at how they've been running the ball the previous 2 weeks, I can kind of see why that is. They're not healthy on the offensive line, and the O-line and D-line do look demoralized. They look disheveled. They look like they're getting their brakes beaten off, honestly. The way that Oregon ran against them, I was watching Michigan State's defensive line get moved effortlessly. It was a work of art. It was unlike anything I have seen so far this season. Ohio State ran well on Michigan State because they have insane athletes, so it didn't matter that they weren't always getting push. Sometimes Michigan State even got penetration, but it was in the wrong places, or Ohio State, to their credit, opened up a lane, and Judkins and Henderson just easily took off. It was more because of the athleticism rather than the scheme or also execution on the offensive line. With Oregon just killed them on the D-line, on the O-line. Oregon owned them in the trenches, and I imagine that in a hypothetical rematch, Ohio State would too. And combined with their athleticism, that may make for an even uglier game. So I don't know if it's just because Ohio State and Oregon are that good, and those are the 2 most recent performances. And it sucks to have them back-to-back because those are the 2 games that are stuck in your mind. So there very well could be a negative bias toward Michigan State. I was not disheartened by that performance against Ohio State at all. In fact, I thought there was somewhat of a moral victory for MSU there. And I think those type of victories are permitted in year 1 of a serious rebuild. That Oregon game, though, that left a bad taste in my mouth. It did. So let me know if you think that opinion of mine is unwarranted or not. But I don't think it is. I think when you look at Michigan State right now and what they have done through 6 games, they are running for 3.8 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns. They've been sacked a total of 15 times through 6 games. They're completing 59% of their throws, 5 passing touchdowns, 8 interceptions. You look at the 2023 team, 14 passing touchdowns on the season, 13 interceptions. They completed 58.3% of their throws. They ran for 2.9 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns, gave up 25 sacks, 1,074 yards. The 2023 team I think is worse than this year's team, in large part because the defense has taken steps forward, and I think that the rushing offense and also the receivers specifically are better. But Childs is not exactly playing that much better than a lot of Michigan State quarterbacks from last year. He has higher upside, but he also turns it over a lot, much more than he scores touchdowns for his own team. And Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and even Iowa, those are the top 4 defenses last year. Those are the 4 best defenses in America, and Michigan State played all of them last year and still found a way, partially because of some early games against Richmond and Central Michigan, to score a bunch of touchdowns through the air. 14 TDs, 13 INTs. I'm not saying that team was good. What I'm saying is to finish the year with less passing touchdowns than the 2023 team would be quite an embarrassment, and I think could be very damning of the situation that is occurring, specifically at quarterback. Childs is 86 of 152 for 1,212 yards. He's completing 56.6% of his throws, averaging 8 yards per pass attempt, 5 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, a 53.3 QBR, and a 123.9 passer rating. And he has 115 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. He's also been sacked 13 times, though, and some of that is on him. Comparing to last year's best quarterback, a Keaton Hauser or Sam Leavitt, they had a 113 passer rating and a 127.3 passer rating, respectively. And Nate Carter averaged 4.3 yards per carry last year. And I loved watching him last season. This season, he averages 4.2 yards per carry, and he only has 1 rushing touchdown. 1 through 6 games. MSU has 7 rushing touchdowns through 6 games. Last season, MSU only had 7 rushing touchdowns on the entire season. So while there are improvements from last year's team was a disaster. Even though it's only year 1, you really don't want to be drawing comparisons to the 2023 team. You want to be drawing comparisons to the 2022 team, or a team that had some life. And again, they've played Oregon, they've played Ohio State back-to-back. Michigan State honestly probably has a easier schedule this season than last season, where they played the 4 best defenses in the country, who statistically were perhaps generationally great, and they also played Washington, who had a generationally great offense. I think Michigan State last year had the nation's toughest schedule, and it wasn't particularly close. This season, there's more wiggle room, but I don't know if Michigan State's taking full advantage of that, and Aiden Childs looks broken. And when I'm saying all these things, I'm not indicting the staff at all. I think the staff, as I'll discuss in a minute or so, is still elite, and I still have faith in them. There are some things that I'm questioning about them, but I think that's normal in a rebuild, especially one that may finish with a losing record, where Michigan State now goes 3 years in a row without reaching postseason play. And Childs, look, 4-star in the portal, 4-star out of high school, did pretty good at Oregon State, although he was spoon-fed throws and played in an offense that I think was an efficiency monster, particularly at running the football and also in the trenches with Damian Martinez and some of those NFL offensive linemen there. However, he's been disappointing. I thought he was going to come in and with an offensive line that was improved from last season, a rushing attack that was improved from last season, and a defense that you just knew, fire Scotty Hazelton and bring in someone who's competent and knows how to run a Big Ten defense. This defense has talent. They'll get better immediately. And despite all of that, Michigan State's quarterback play, it's not good. It's only good situationally, or every other play, or every 3 plays, or every 4, and then it's an abject disaster the other few. It's frustrating to watch. I'm a Michigan fan, rooting for my crosstown rival, who objectively may beat Michigan, and I may pick that to happen. We'll have to see. And I am letting myself not just get mad that my team, to quickly jump out of the analyst bubble, that my team sucks, and that sucks, but I'm also mad that Michigan State stinks, that they are worse than I expected them to be. And I want them to be good, and it's frustrating to watch, and I empathize with Michigan State fans. This defense has 15 sacks. They have 7 interceptions. They have 3 forced fumbles. I mean, those numbers were never put up by any Scotty Hazelton defense this quickly, outside of maybe that amount of sacks in 2021 when they had that awesome defensive front. Charles Brantley is playing out of his mind. He has a pick 6, 3 interceptions, 5 passes defended, 23 total tackles. He's having a really good year. A really good year. He had a pick against Oregon, a pick 6 against Prairie View, a pick against Maryland, and a pass defended, at least one of them in every game except for the Oregon game, where he had a season-high 9 total tackles. He's done a very good job. And I think defensively, Michigan State has done well. And offensively, they've improved from last year. I think the ceiling of this team is much higher than the ceiling of last year's team, where it felt like in some of the wins that they eked out, they were genuinely just trying their hardest until inevitably the bottom of the ship fell out and they all just sunk to the bottom of the ocean. But Giles does look broken, and in my mind, that is some cause for concern. And I want to close off with a positive note here. And it's a bit of an awkward transition, because everything that I've just described is indicative of something that hasn't really gone to plan. And maybe that's my own fault for having higher expectations of this team, but I know the Boston College loss was embarrassing. It was. And then the way that Ohio State game turned out, where that could have been an Oregon State USC situation in 2022, where Jonathan Smith and the Beavers defense and even the offense outside of the quarterback play, where they, by the way, threw 4 interceptions in that game. They played out of their mind, competed with USC, and there's a high beat of optimism for the Beavers after that game. They lost it because of an amazing player like Caleb Williams, but they competed. Instead, Michigan State turned it over a ton, and they're a young team to a certain degree. That's going to happen. But every time the defense tried to get a stop, they couldn't. And that's a big credit to Ohio State, but also some things to look into. And then against Oregon, they came out flat-footed after that first drive. And it was just, it's the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. Turning it over against Ohio State, turning it over against Oregon, throwing interceptions beforehand. And against the Buckeyes and the Ducks, it honestly looked like he was trying so hard to not throw interceptions that sometimes he, took sacks or just made plays that, weren't picks, that don't necessarily ruin your stat board, but that were still just as bad in many aspects. I still have faith in Jonathan Smith and his staff. I think they're one of the best staffs in America. I think they're one of the best staffs in the Big Ten. But there are questions. There are. More so with the roster, though. Like, what does quarterback look like after this season is done? What does that look like? Do we roll with Aiden Childs? Do we try and get someone from the portal? The offensive line is going to have to, I think, restock using the portal. I think it'll be similar with the defensive line, who has a lot of older players on it. And what about running back? Because K'Ron Lynch-Adams, I think, this was his final year of eligibility. And what about there's just so many questions, because I think it's clear this team is better than it was last year, especially on the coaching angle. But how does the roster improve, and how does Michigan State get back to being a good team? And especially with this transfer portal era and with the resources that Michigan State has, how do they get back to being a good team in a fairly timely manner? Try and answer my question in the comments section below if you can. What I would say the answer is recruit, try and get some 4-stars, some blue chip players, and use the portal as much as you can within reason. Do not be like Deion Sanders. He is an exception to the rule, and build up from there. And hopefully by next season, or 2026 or 2027 even, I think we can give Jonathan Smith some time. This ball will be rolling. But with how bad Aiden Childs has been in particular, he's probably the biggest question mark on this team entering this coming preseason, especially with how confident he's been, and his skill has not backed up his confidence one bit, and that's never a good sign. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal and Honolulu OH for sponsoring this video as Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Honolulu or Ismar, Tyler Nye, Chilton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the links in the description and down below in the pinned comment. Go green and go white. Go Sparty. I'll see you guys very soon.